Lambda expression. In the previous video I showed you the structure of LINQ methods. I mentioned there that we can use lambda expression for the input parameters, which are of type function. In this video I will show you what is lambda expression and how to use in general. Before I explain lambda expression, let me do a recap from the previous video. I mentioned that we have two types of methods. Either extension methods or not extension methods. We only have these three methods, which are not extension. For these methods we don't need to use lambda expression. So, I will only talk about the extension methods in this video. To use an extension method we have two ways. Either we set the sequence at the beginning, then the method with the other inputs for the method. Or we set the class name, then the method with all inputs, like the sequence and all other inputs. For example, for the following method we have two inputs. The first one is of type IEnumerable of tSource. It's the sequence. And the second one is the value, what we want to append. It's of type tSource. Assume I have the following sequence and I want to append this value to the sequence. Let's see how to use the method for both values. I will do that in both ways. The queries will be as following. The result of this query will be the following sequence. So, keep in mind these two ways how to use a method and where to set the inputs. As you see, this method doesn't contain any input parameters of type function, therefore we don't need to use lambda expression. Let's see another method, where for example, where filters a sequence of values based on a predicate. This method contains two input parameters, source and predicate. Source represents the sequence, which we want to query. Predicate is of type function, which means that we have to use lambda expression for this parameter. But before we learn lambda expression, let's do a recap about the input parameters. For each input parameter we set always a name and type. For example, here we have the first parameter source, and the type IEnumerable of tSource. The second parameter, predicate, of type function. In this video we want to learn more about parameters of type function, because we only use lambda expression for these parameters. Let's see another methods, where we have parameters of type function. For example, the following parameters from different methods. Let's understand how is the structure for such parameters. As mentioned before, each parameter will be defined with name and type. So, we have on the left side the name, and on the right side the type. Let's start with the name. The name for a parameter has no impact on the parameter. It's only a name, not more. But in LINQ methods the names are selected to give a hint for the developer, what we have to do once we want to set the parameter. We have three kinds of names. The first one is called predicate. The second one is called func. The third one is called selector, or also something else with selector, like key selector, element selector, and so on. So, we have these three kinds of names. Let's understand what does each name mean. I will start with the first one, predicate. I already explained this keyword in LINQ Terms video. A predicate in general is a statement about something that is either true or false. It means, we should set an expression here, that returns true or false. So, once you see a parameter of type function with the name predicate, you have to know that you should write an expression, that returns true or false. For example, the following expression, which returns true if the variable x is greater than 5, and false if the variable x is smaller or equal to 5. That's all you have to know about this name for now. Let's see the next name, selector. As mentioned, we could have only selector, or a name with selector. The meaning is always the same. As the name suggests, we should set an expression here to select something. The expression for these names is mostly the same, that we only set the variable of the function, for example this one. The meaning here is that we want to select each element from the sequence. Or this expression, where I use the variable multiply 5, which means that I want to select each element and multiply it by 5. It means, we don't write an expression here which returns true or false. We only write an expression to select something. The last name, func, is only used in the method aggregate. I will talk about it in detail in the aggregate method video. These are the used names for input parameters of type function. Let's now see the types. As mentioned, all these parameters are of type function. But the content is different. We have data types inside the function. We always have at least 2 types, but we could have 3 or more. Each type represents a parameter. It means, these types are for the parameters, which we have to use for the function. In other words, the function acts like a method. So, it has inputs and output. These types represents the inputs and outputs of the function. Let's now understand what are these types for. I will start with the last type. This type represents the output of the function. For example, this function returns Boolean output. The next one returns an output of type tSource. The next one returns an output of type integer. And so on. We can find out, which output should we get from the function. In summary, the last parameter represents always the output type of the function. Let's check the other types. As mentioned, we have at least 2 types. The last one is the output. The first one is always used for the sequence that we want to query. The sequence could be a data table, an array, a list, or any other type of collections, which implement IEnumerable or IQueryable. So, the first type represents the sequence, but it must not have always the same type. Sometimes it's tSource, sometimes it's tOuter, and so on. I already explained these keywords in the previous video, that we use these keywords as placeholder for any type we may have. It means, tSource for example could be data table, array, list, or any other types. The same also for the other keywords, like tOuter, tinner, etc. Some functions have more than 2 types in the brackets. As mentioned, the first one is the sequence, and the last one is the output. All other types are also input parameters for the function. These could be also sequences, but they could be integer numbers or something else. This is the structure of the input parameters of type function. Now you know what does each name mean and how to read out the type and what does each type mean. Let's see how to write a lambda expression using this information. Lambda expression consists of 2 parts. The first one contains the word function with the input parameters. It means, here we have to set a parameter for each input parameter. For example, the following input parameter of a method. We have only 2 types inside the function. The last one as mentioned is the output. So, we don't need to use any parameter for it. And the other one is the input parameter. So, we have to use a parameter for it. To write a parameter we use any name we want, for example, name, number, x, etc. The second part is the expression. Here we have to set an expression using the input parameters. For example, here we have only one parameter x. Using x we can write an expression. We have the word predicate, which means that we have to write an expression that returns either true or false. It means, using x I can write an expression that returns true or false. For example, this expression. This is how to write a lambda expression. In this example we only have one input parameter. But in case we have more than one, we can write the second parameter in this way. And we can use both parameters to write the expression. That's all about lambda expression. Let's now try to use it in different methods. I will start with the method where. Here is the method structure. I have here an integer array, which contains different numbers. And I want to filter this array to get only the numbers, which are greater than 3. To filter a sequence we can use where method. So, I will use this method to filter the sequence. Let's start step by step. I will first write the information from the method structure. The method name is where. The input parameters are these 2. Source of type IEnumerable of tSource. Predicate of type function. And the output is of type IEnumerable of tSource. As mentioned, for all input parameters of type function we use lambda expression. In this method, we have only one parameter of type function. So, we need only one lambda expression here. I also showed you the both ways of using an extension method. Let's try to use both ways to write the query using where operator, to get only the numbers which are greater than 3. I will start with the first one. The first input parameter we have is source. This represents the sequence. In this case it's the array. So, I will set the array at this position. Then the method, which is where. Now we have to set the other inputs if we have any. In this method we have another input, which is predicate. So, we have to set this parameter within the brackets. As mentioned, for this one I will use a lambda expression, because it's of type function. First I will set the word function. In the brackets I have to set the parameters of this function. Here we have only one parameter as input, which is of type tSource. I will set the parameter name x for example. Now I have to write the expression. So, here we have a predicate, which means that I have to write an expression which returns true or false. I want to get the numbers, which are greater than 3. So, I can write that here as expression. This expression returns true if the number is greater than 3, and false if the number is smaller or equal to 3. That's all what we have to set. The output of this query will be the following sequence, which is of type IEnumerable of tSource. Let's now do the same using the second way. First I have to write the class name, which is enumerable in this case. Then the method name, where. After that the sequence. And then the other input parameters. Here I have only the predicate, that I set using Lambda expression. The output of this query will be also the same output. This is how to use a method to write a query, and also how to use Lambda expression once we need that. Later in the course you will understand the Lambda expression and the methods better. Before ending this video, let me summarize the most important points. Lambda expression can be used only for input parameters of type function. Input parameters could have one of these three names. Predicate, func, selector. Predicate is used once we have to set an expression, which returns true or false. Selector is used once we have to select elements from a sequence, without having to set an expression which returns true or false. Func is used only in aggregate method. All these names are to select elements from a sequence, but the way how to select is different. The type function has input and output parameters. The first one is always the sequence, from which we want to get the data. The last one is always the type of the output from the expression. All other parameters between the first and last one are also input parameters. Lambda expression consists of two parts, function with input parameters, and an expression. One last important point you have to know about Lambda expression is that the expression acts like for each loop. For example, the following query. Here the expression works in this way. It iterates through all numbers of the array and checks each number, if it's greater than 3. This means, x represents each number inside the array. That's all about Lambda expression.